The year is 1883. The northern range rises like a jagged wall of stone, its peaks hidden behind eternal frost and thick clouds. The wind here doesn't merely blow, it screams through the narrow passes, rattling shutters and chilling bones. In the village of Oakhaven, a cluster of gray stone huts cling to the mountainside as if they are trying to hold on to the earth itself. The air is heavy with the smell of peat smoke, wet wool, and the unspoken fear that lives in every home. Inside one of the cramped cottages, 14-year-old Mara kneels by the hearth. Her small hands are cracked and red from the cold, raw from hours of scrubbing soot from the stones. Each scrub leaves her fingers bleeding slightly, but she doesn't stop. She knows the punishment for slowing down. Her stepmother, Agnes, stands over her like a looming shadow, her face hard and unyielding, carved as if from the very granite of the peaks outside. Her eyes are cold, and her voice is sharper than the wind. "Faster, girl!" Agnes snaps, kicking a bucket of dirty water toward Mara. The water sloshes across the floor and splashes onto Mara's sleeves. "The sun is barely up, and you're already lagging. It's no wonder the goats stopped milking this week. Your shadow falls on them, and they turn sour." Mara keeps her head down. She doesn't look up because she has learned that looking up invites more punishment. She whispers, "The goats are old, stepmother, and the winter is hard." Agnes steps closer, her breath cold and harsh. "Don't you dare speak of things you don't understand," she hisses. "Your mother's blood is in you. I see it in the way you look at the woods. The village is talking, Mara. They say the blight on the potato cellar started the day you turned 14. Mara's heart tightens. She feels the weight of the accusation pressing down on her like the snow outside. At the table, her two step-siblings, Silas and Ilara, sit eating thick porridge. They snicker with cruel delight, enjoying the show. A spoon drops to the floor, and both of them laugh loudly, their eyes glittering with mockery. Mara crawls to the floor to clean it, her face burning with shame. To Silas and Ilara, Mara isn't a sister. She is a ghost they are forced to live with, an unwanted shadow in their home. She is the reminder of a mother they never knew and a power they fear. Mara cleans the mess silently, her body shaking from the cold and her spirit trembling from the constant cruelty. Yet she keeps going, because if she stops, the storm inside the cottage will only grow louder. Later that morning, the sun struggles to break through the thick clouds, and the village of Oakhaven moves slowly under the weight of the cold. The air is heavy with frost, and every breath looks like smoke. Mara is sent to the well, her thin cloak barely keeping the chill away. As she walks, the villagers part like the sea, stepping aside with fear in their eyes. Each time she passes, they make the sign of the evil eye, two fingers pointed toward the ground, a silent gesture meant to protect themselves from her presence. Their faces are blank, but their eyes are filled with judgment. Mara keeps her head down, walking faster, trying not to feel the weight of their fear pressing on her back. Near the edge of the village, where the stone huts give way to frozen forest, she hears a soft whimper. The sound is small, almost swallowed by the wind, but it is unmistakable. Mara follows it, moving carefully between the stacked wood piles and frost-covered barrels. Behind one of the wood piles, she finds young Toby, the blacksmith's son. He is only a boy, no older than 12, and he lies on the ground with his leg caught in a rusted fox trap. The metal teeth are biting deep into his calf, and blood stains the snow around him. His face is pale and sweating, shock shaking his body. "Toby, stay still," Mara whispers, rushing to him. He looks up with wide eyes. "Get away! My Da says you'll curse me!" he cries, his voice trembling, but he is too weak to struggle. Mara kneels beside him, her hands steady despite the cold. "I'm not cursing you," she says firmly. "I'm helping." She remembers her mother's voice, soft, warm, and filled with herbs and calm. She grips a heavy branch and uses it as a lever, pushing with all her strength. The trap's metal jaws resist, creaking loudly, but slowly they begin to open. Mara's breath is loud in the cold air as she works, her muscles burning with effort. When the trap finally loosens, she tears a strip from her wool shawl and binds the wound tightly. She hums a low, steady tune, an old melody her mother used to sing to calm pain. The boy's breathing slows, and the fear in his eyes softens. "Keep it clean, Toby," Mara whispers, rushing to him. He looks up with wide eyes. "You can tell him on Judgment Day." Toby stares at her, confused. He doesn't understand why she would help him when everyone else treats her like a curse. But he is alive, and that is all that matters. Just as the blacksmith's voice calls out from a distance, calling his son, Mara disappears into the mist, leaving behind a boy who is shaking, but alive. The fog closes around her like a cloak, hiding her from the world that refuses to accept her. The peace of the morning is shattered by a sudden scream that cuts through the cold air like a blade. The villagers stop what they're doing and turn toward the center of the square. Their faces show curiosity, fear, and the eagerness of people who live by gossip. Mistress Vane, the wealthiest woman in Oakhaven, stands in the middle of the square, her cheeks flushed red with fury. She is dressed in a thick, dark coat that shows her wealth, but her hands are shaking. "It's gone," she cries loudly, her voice trembling. "My mother's gold locket, stolen from my vanity while I walked to the chapel." The crowd gasps, and murmurs spread quickly like wildfire. Everyone looks at each other, searching for the culprit. The cold air seems to hold its breath. Mara is nearby, carrying a heavy load of firewood on her back. She hears the scream and instinctively stops. Her heart begins to race, but she tries to stay calm. Agnes is already in the crowd. Her eyes quickly dart toward Mara. She sees her chance. This is the moment she has been waiting for, a chance to remove the girl who reminds her of her husband's first wife, a woman she envied and hated. Agnes steps forward, her voice loud and sharp. "Search the girl," she shouts, pointing directly at Mara. "I saw her lingering near the Vane estate this morning. She has the sticky fingers of a witch." The villagers turn their eyes to Mara, suspicion burning in their faces. Some start whispering. Some start stepping closer, ready to accuse. Elder Caleb, the village leader, steps forward. His beard looks like a frozen waterfall, and his face is serious and stern. "Search her," he says, his voice cold and final. Mara is shoved to the ground by two villagers. Snow and dirt mix with her hair. She tries to stand, but they push her back down. Her hands tremble as she tries to protect herself. Agnes leans down, her face filled with fake concern. She reaches into Mara's hidden apron pocket with practiced ease. Her fingers move like she has done this many times before. She pulls out a shimmering gold locket. Mara's heart stops. She stares at the locket in shock, unable to breathe. I didn't. Stepmother, I've never seen that," Mara says, her voice cracking. "Liar," she cries. "She brings shame to my house. She is a thief and a curse." The villagers react instantly. They are furious and frightened, ready to believe the worst. Mara's body shakes with fear. She realizes that this is not just an accusation. This is a trap. The cold wind blows through the square, and Mara stands alone, surrounded by people who once pretended. The village council meets in the drafty great hall. The building is made of rough stone, and the cold seems to seep into every crack and corner. The air is so frigid that every breath is visible, like a small cloud of smoke that disappears into the dim light. Mara sits in the center of the hall, bound with rough ropes that dig into her wrists. Her clothes are dirty and torn from the struggle, and her eyes are wide with fear.
She is surrounded by the council members and villagers, all of them standing with their faces hard and unkind. Elder Caleb stands at the front, his presence commanding. His beard looks like a frozen waterfall, and his eyes are cold and unwavering. He looks down at Mara with a mixture of authority and fear, as if he is trying to prove something to himself. "The law of the range is simple," Caleb bellows, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We cannot house those who sow discord. The mountains decide the fate of the wicked. Mara, daughter of the healer, you are cast out." Mara's heart pounds in her chest. Her hands tremble as she tries to speak, but her voice shakes with emotion. "It's a death sentence," Mara screams, her voice cracking. "The storm is coming. You're killing me for a lie." The hall falls silent for a moment. The villagers exchange looks, but no one speaks. The cold air feels heavier, as if the walls themselves are judging her. Agnes steps forward, standing behind the elder like a shadow. Her face is smug and cold, her eyes shining with satisfaction. She speaks with a calm voice, but her words are sharp and cruel. "The mountains will judge you," Agnes says. "If you are innocent, the spirits will keep you warm, but we all know they won't." The villagers, fueled by years of superstition and fear of a bad harvest, nod in agreement. They are not seeing Mara as a child anymore. They see her as the source of their hunger, their fear, and their misfortune. Mara's chest tightens. She realizes that the village has decided her fate, and no matter how much she protests, her words won't change their minds. The great hall feels like a prison, and the mountains outside feel like an executioner waiting to strike.
The sun sinks behind the jagged peaks of the northern range, turning the snow into a bruised purple color, as if the sky itself is bleeding. The air is heavy and cold, and the world seems to hold its breath. 2 village guards lead Mara toward the high pass, a narrow ledge that clings to the mountainside like a thin scar. The path is treacherous, and the wind cuts through the air like knives. Mara's hands are still shaking from the council's verdict, and the fear in her chest feels like a stone. They reach the ledge and stop. The guards cut her bonds with a sharp knife, the rope falling away like a broken promise. Mara stands there, shivering, wearing only a thin coat that offers little protection against the mountain's fury. "Don't come back," one guard mutters, his voice low. His eyes are filled with pity, but his body is already turning away. He doesn't want to stay in the cold any longer than necessary. Mara watches them leave, their figures disappearing into the fading light. The village is behind them, warm and safe, and she is left alone at the edge of the world. The wind begins to howl, growing stronger and louder. It becomes a whiteout, a storm so fierce that the sky and ground blend into one blinding sheet of ice. Snow swirls in the air, cutting at her face. Mara stumbles, her boots sinking into the deep drifts. Her toes go numb, and her eyelashes begin to frost over. Every breath feels like shards of ice in her throat. The cold is not just outside, it is inside her bones, slowly turning her into a statue of frost. She tries to walk, but the storm is too strong. Her body weakens. She collapses against a rock, the hard surface biting into her back. She feels her strength slipping away like sand through fingers. "Mama," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the wind. Her vision begins to blur, and the world turns dim. "I'm coming home," she murmurs, and the cold closes in around her like a dark blanket. The world had become nothing but white. The storm roared like a beast, and the wind tore through the mountains with a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. The northern range was a wall of ice and stone, and the snowstorm had turned the path into a blinding abyss. In that frozen chaos, a massive figure moved steadily through the white. He was a man built like the mountains themselves, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a presence that made the storm seem smaller. He wore furs of bear and wolf, and his boots were spiked with iron, gripping the icy ground like claws. His face was hidden partly by a hood, but his eyes were sharp and observant. This was Gideon Stone, a hermit who lived so high up the range that eagles were his only neighbors. He spoke more to trees than to people, and the mountain had taught him to survive where others could not. As he pushed through the blizzard, his eyes caught a sudden flash of blue, something that didn't belong in the white world. It was a small coat, bright and worn, struggling against the wind. Gideon stopped and turned toward the color. He moved closer, stepping carefully over snowdrifts. The wind howled louder, but he continued, guided by the faint blue. Then he saw her, Mara. She lay half buried in the snow, her face pale and her body still. Her coat was soaked and her eyelashes were frozen. She looked like a small, fragile bird lost in the storm. Gideon grunted and knelt beside her. He checked her pulse with practiced hands. It was faint, like a fluttering bird struggling to stay alive. Without a word, Gideon lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost like a bundle of twigs. The storm whipped around them, but he pulled his heavy cloak over her, shielding her from the worst of the wind. He began the grueling climb toward the timberline, each step a battle against the storm. The snow pressed against his boots, the wind pushed against his body, and the cold tried to steal his strength. But Gideon did not stop. He carried Mara with steady determination, moving like a mountain itself, slow, powerful, and unstoppable. The storm tried to swallow them, but he kept going, driven by something he didn't explain. In the white abyss, the hermit and the girl became one moving shadow against the endless snow, heading towards the only place where warmth could still exist.
Mara wakes slowly, like someone coming back from a long, dark dream. The first thing she notices is the smell. Cedar wood, dry and sweet, mixed with the sharp scent of boiling broth. Her body feels heavy and weak, but the warmth around her is real. She opens her eyes and sees a roaring fire in a stone hearth. She is wrapped in heavy blankets, stacked thick like layers of protection. The cabin is small and simple, but it feels safer than anything she has known in days. The walls are lined with dried herbs hanging in bundles, iron tools hanging neatly, and shelves filled with old books. Everything has a purpose here, and nothing feels wasted. Mara tries to sit up, but her body trembles. She looks around, confused and cautious. Then she sees him, Gideon Stone. He sits at a heavy wooden table, focused on sharpening a knife. His face is scarred, and his eyes are the color of flint, cold and sharp, but not cruel. He looks up, not surprised to see her awake. He speaks in a voice that sounds like grinding stones. "Drink," he says, handing her a wooden mug filled with bitter tea. Mara flinches, holding the mug carefully. She stares at him, her voice trembling. Who are you?" she asks. "Did the village send you to finish it?" Gideon pauses, then answers calmly. "The village doesn't come up here," he says. "They're afraid of the heights. I'm Gideon. You were dying. Now you're not." Mara's eyes fill with tears, but she forces them back. "I didn't steal it," she says, the words spilling out. "I didn't do any of it. They hate me because of my mother." Gideon stops sharpening the knife and looks at her with a serious expression. His voice becomes quieter, almost thoughtful. "Your mother was Elena, wasn't she? The woman who lived by the black tarn." Mara freezes. "You knew her?" Gideon nods slowly.
"She saved my hand from rot 10 years ago," he says. "She wasn't a witch. She was a woman who knew the mountains better than the cowards in the valley." Mara looks at him in shock. Her heart feels heavy and hopeful at the same time. Someone knows the truth about her mother, and maybe, just maybe, someone believes her. The storm raged for 3 full days, and the world outside the cabin became a white prison. The wind howled like a wild animal, and the snow hit the windows in a constant, fierce barrage. It was a storm that could have swallowed a person whole if they were foolish enough to go outside. Inside the cabin, however, the air was warmer, though still tense. Gideon did not offer comfort in the way Mara expected. There were no kind words, no soft gestures. He didn't sit beside her and soothe her fear. Instead, he offered something else: survival. On the first day, he showed her how to shave kindling from a damp log. He held a knife with a steady hand, and his movements were precise and calm. "The mountain doesn't care if you're innocent," he told her, his voice rough like stone. "It only cares if you're prepared." Mara watched closely, her eyes fixed on the blade. She tried to copy his motion, and her hands shook at first, but she kept going, learning the rhythm. She learned how to shave the wood in thin strips that would catch flame, even when the log was wet. On the second day, Gideon taught her how to find fat wood inside a pine tree, wood that burns even in rain. He took her outside briefly, just enough for her to see the thick, resin-filled wood beneath the bark. He showed her how to recognize it, how to gather it, and how to protect it from the wet. On the third day, he taught her how to walk on top of the snow crust without breaking through. He told her to step lightly, to feel the weight of the snow, and to listen to the sound it made. Mara practiced again and again, her body learning the movement until it felt natural. Each lesson made her stronger. The fear inside her began to change into something else: determination. For the first time in her life, she was not the witch's girl. She was a student of the wild, learning the language of the mountains and the rules of survival. In the evenings, when the storm quieted down just enough to hear the fire crackling, they talked. Mara told Gideon about the locket, about the betrayal, and about the village that had turned against her. Gideon listened quietly, his eyes serious. "They fear what they can't control," Gideon said at one point. His voice was low and thoughtful. "Years ago there was a fever. Your mother tried to quarantine the sick. The villagers thought she was casting spells to keep them trapped. They let people die because they wouldn't listen to her." Mara's eyes widened, and she felt a sharp pain in her chest. Gideon continued. "Agnes, she was the loudest voice then, too." Mara's heart clenched. She realized the truth was deeper than she had imagined. The fear of her mother wasn't just superstition, it was a lie that had been built over years. As the storm continued outside, Mara sat beside the fire, feeling the warmth and strength growing inside her. She was no longer just a victim. She was becoming something else, someone who could survive. The storm outside finally seemed to quiet, leaving the cabin in a strange silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional drip of melting snow from the roof. Mara moved slowly through the cabin, still feeling the weight of the last days in her bones. She walked to a dusty corner where old supplies were stored, pots, cloths, and forgotten items. Her eyes scanned the shelves, searching for something useful. She reached into a box and pulled out a worn leather satchel. It looked old and familiar, like it belonged to someone who had lived here long ago. Mara opened the satchel carefully, and her fingers brushed against the soft lining. She felt something inside, tucked into the fabric. Her heart skipped. She pulled out a folded letter, its edges yellowed with age. The handwriting was delicate and familiar. the kind of writing that belonged to someone who had once lived in this cabin and loved the mountains. Mara sat by the firelight and began to read. The words burned into her heart with every line. Tears began to fill her eyes, and she couldn't stop them from falling. The letter read, "To my Mara, if you are reading this, the shadows of Oakhaven have grown too long. I leave you this truth. Agnes is not just your stepmother. She was my sister's daughter, your cousin. She hated my gift because she could never master it. She stole your father from me with lies, and she will try to steal your light. The locket she claims is hers actually belonged to our grandmother. Look for the mark of the rowan tree on the back." Mara's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to process the truth. She felt her heart pounding so hard it seemed like it would burst. She looked up at Gideon, who stood nearby with a serious expression. He watched her quietly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Gideon," Mara gasps, "Agnes didn't just frame me. She's been erasing my family for years." The words shook the cabin. The truth was heavier than the snow outside, and Mara felt the weight of it in her bones. She realized that the betrayal was not just about the locket. It was about her whole family being stolen and erased. The fire crackled, and the cabin seemed to grow colder as the truth settled in. Mara looked at the letter again, focusing on the faint drawing of a rowan tree at the bottom. She knew that this mark was the key to everything. The storm had finally broken, and the sky above Oakhaven was a pale, fragile blue, like a bruise slowly fading. The villagers believed the worst was over. They had survived the whiteout, and the great hall was alive with laughter, song, and the smell of roasted meat. The air was thick with the false comfort of triumph. They celebrated as if the gods had forgiven them. But the celebration was about to end. A sudden crash echoed through the hall. The heavy wooden doors were kicked open with a force that shook the room. The torches flickered, and every voice went silent at once. A tall, rugged man stood in the doorway, dripping with snow. His furs were heavy and wet, and his iron-spiked boots left deep marks on the stone floor. Beside him, wrapped in thick furs, stood Mara. She looked like she had been carved out of ice. Her cheeks were still pale from the cold, but her eyes were alive, sharp and burning with a quiet fire. A whisper traveled through the crowd. "Mara? A ghost!" Agnes rose instantly, her face turning ashen. She stared at Mara like the girl had risen from the dead, and her voice trembled with panic. "You! How dare you return? You were judged!" Mara stepped forward, her boots making a soft sound on the stone floor. She did not tremble. Her hands were still, her posture steady. The fear that had once controlled her was gone, replaced by something stronger. She spoke with a voice that didn't waver. "I was judged by cowards," she said. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Mara and the elder. Some tried to hide their faces, as if shame could be worn like a cloak. Others stared openly, angry and confused. Elder Caleb stood at the center of the hall, his frozen waterfall beard trembling with the tension. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound was drowned out by Mistress Vane's sudden shout. "I have it here!" Mistress Vane cried, pulling a small gold locket from around her neck. Her voice was frantic, as if she could feel the truth slipping away. Mara pointed, her finger steady. "Agnes said it was a Vane heirloom," she said, "but look at the back of it." The hall fell silent. Agnes's eyes widened in horror. Mara stepped closer, and the crowd leaned in. There, on the back of the locket, was a delicate engraving of a rowan tree, an old symbol of the healers. Mara's voice grew stronger, louder. "It belongs to the line of the healers," she said. "Agnes stole it from my mother's trunk years ago and planted it on me to finish what she started during the fever." The hall was still. No one moved. Then Gideon stepped forward, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "I found this letter in Elena's satchel," Gideon said, holding the torn leather satchel up for all to see. "Agnes isn't a victim of a witch's stepdaughter. She's a thief who betrayed her own blood." Agnes's face twisted with rage, her mouth open in a silent scream. The villagers began to whisper, first softly, then louder, as if the truth was contagious. The shame and fear in their eyes were replaced by something new: guilt. And for the first time in her life, Mara didn't feel like a curse. She felt like the truth.
Agnes tried to run, but the villagers, now seeing the panic in her eyes, moved instinctively to block her path. The room shifted like a wave, closing in around her. She was no longer the woman in control. She was the accused. Elder Caleb stepped forward, his beard like a frozen waterfall, and took the gold locket from Mistress Vane's trembling hands. He held it close to the firelight, inspecting the back with a steady gaze. "The Rowan mark," he murmured, voice low and heavy. "The mark of the old healers." He turned his cold eyes toward Agnes. The hall went quiet. "You lied to the council," Caleb said, his tone hard and unforgiving. "You used our fear to ruin a child." Agnes's face went white. For the first time, she was stripped of her cruelty and left with raw terror. She fell to her knees on the wooden floor, trembling. Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean paths through the grime. She stared at Mara, her voice breaking as she screamed, "Your mother had everything, the respect, the knowledge. I was just the girl who cleaned her jars. I deserved that locket. I deserved a life." Her confession echoed through the hall like a knife. The villagers looked at one another, ashamed. The celebration was gone. Their faces were full of regret and horror. They saw the girl they had nearly killed standing tall and unharmed, a living proof that the mountain had not consumed her. And for the first time, Mara didn't feel like a curse. She felt like a truth they could no longer ignore. The hall was still. The air felt heavy, as if the very stones were holding their breath. Elder Caleb turned slowly toward Mara. His eyes were tired, but his voice was firm. "Agnes will be banished to the lower mines," he declared. "And you, Mara, we owe you a debt. Your mother's house shall be yours again. We ask your forgiveness." Mara looked at the faces in the crowd, faces she had once begged for mercy, faces that had turned away from her when she needed them most. She saw the shame in their eyes, the guilt hidden behind their anger. Her gaze moved to Agnes, broken and weeping on the floor. The woman who had ruined her life was now nothing more than a terrified child in front of everyone. Mara's voice was soft but steady. "I don't want the house," she said. The words floated through the hall like a calm wind. She turned toward the door where Gideon stood, waiting. His presence was steady, like a mountain itself. Mara took a breath and faced the crowd again. "The village lives in the shadow of the mountain," she said, her voice clear. "I want to live on top of it." She paused, and the hall fell quieter. "I forgive you, Agnes," she continued, looking directly at her stepmother. "But I won't be your victim anymore, and I won't be your healer until you learn to stop fearing the medicine." With that, Mara walked out of the hall. Her head was held high, her steps steady. She left behind the fear, the cruelty, and the lies. She stepped into the cold mountain air. Free. High above Oakhaven, the world seemed different. The air was crisp and clean, as if the storm had washed away not just the snow, but the fear that lived inside the village. From this height,
The northern range looked calm and powerful, its jagged peaks softened by the morning light. A small cabin sat on the ridge, alone but strong. In its window, a faint light flickered, proof that someone was alive, awake, and ready for the new day. Mara and Gideon sat on the porch, wrapped in heavy blankets. They watched the sun rise slowly over the mountains. The sky changed colors, first pale gold, then soft orange and pink, like the world was being painted again. Mara held a small bag of seeds in her hands, herbs for spring. Her fingers were steady now, no longer cracked from fear and cold. Her face was calmer, her eyes clear. She was no longer the girl who had crawled in the snow, no longer the shadow everyone feared. She was the woman of the stone. Gideon broke the silence, his voice quiet but honest. "You're different now," he said. Mara smiled softly, looking at the sunrise. "The mountain didn't break me, it made me." They sat together as the first rays of sunlight touched the peaks. A new day was rising, and with it,